Welcome to Center Stage with international opera star Pamela Kuhn. And now, here is your host, Pamela Kuhn.
And the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. Every year, I go to a place which I desire above all else. On the island of St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands, I find a peace and tranquility that is almost holy to me. When I'm there, I crave being in and around the water. I admire that on this tranquil and sparsely populated island, you can experience the strength of money guarding the sanctity of the wildlife. I am beholden to the Rockefeller Trust, who had the foresight to protect the island from overdevelopment. Since 1956, 60% of the island is protected under the Virgin Islands National Parks. Wildlife, donkeys, and beautiful beaches abound. I arrive, and I don't want to leave. But in recent years, I hear murmurings from the locals who are caught in a dreadful dichotomy. The tourists, who are the lifeblood of their economy, are also the greatest threat to the purity of the islands and the coral that lies below the water. On several of my trips, I have observed while snorkeling that the coral is bleached to the color of the sand surrounding it. What we see is a desert rather than the vibrant array that existed before. Those who live on the water there and cherish its beauty speak longingly of some distant small islands in the British Virgin Islands that are still somewhat unspoiled. There is always a whispered undercurrent of human selfishness that is potentially ruining what some of us hold most dear. In a recent and disturbing obituary published online, it was pronounced that the Great Barrier Reef is dead. The phenomenon known as bleaching has occurred in one of the most profound natural wonders on Earth. What is this going to prompt us to do? I recently sat down with two men who have been working, each in their own way, to save the coral reefs while educating us about the beauty of the profound gardens under the sea. David Kline is a coral reef biologist who studies the fate of coral reefs in a high CO2 future on molecular to ecosystem scales. He is currently an associate project scientist at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California in San Diego. In particular, he collaborates with computer vision scientists, engineers, chemists, and physiologists. He's developing new techniques for studying the impact of climate change on coral reefs. And then perpetual explorer, writer, and filmmaker Luc Hardy, whose film The Pursuit of Endurance, On the Shoulders of Shackleton, has reached a worldwide audience. He is the creator of the Pax Arctica initiative to promote awareness of the threats facing the Arctic, the polar regions, and the oceans. And he is great on the back of a polo pony as well. They are both about to embark on an exciting expedition exploring the beautiful and largely unspoiled coral reefs of Cuba. Their exploration will result in a docudrama film which will share with us the marvels of Cuba and the surrounding waters.
I think there's a lot we can do to ensure that we do have beautiful reefs and healthy oceans for the future. I think it's a little premature to declare the Great Barrier Reef dead. A lot of it is still alive and quite beautiful, and there's a lot of positive things that we can all do to make sure we have beautiful, vibrant coral reefs for our children and grandchildren. And although I'm a scientist, I also feel like it's my life mission to make sure that we do have healthy coral reefs for the future. So
Absolutely.
This is a topic that's very important to me.
So let's get back to that obituary. I mean, this
Right.
kind of promotes a really emotional kind of punch. Was that the idea? And who released this obituary?
So this obituary has been a little bit controversial. There was a paper in Nature that came out, I think now about 2 weeks ago, describing the third global bleaching event that happened in 2016. It was a global event, the third time ever that a bleaching event has happened on reefs all around the world. It's caused by warming seawater temperatures, which disrupt the balance between the corals and the algae that live in their tissue and provide them with most of the energy to build their massive reef structures that are visible from space. When the water gets too warm, with corals, we're talking only 2 degrees above their average temperature for that time of year. The relationship between the coral and the algae in their tissue gets disrupted. the algae leave, and the algae that live in corals are normally brown because they have pigments that are designed to catch the energy of the sun and make sugar through photosynthesis, much like land plants or the grass in your garden does. When the coral bleaches, these algae go away and you can actually see the white skeleton. That's why they look bleached, is the skeleton that's normally you don't see because of the brown coloration of the algae is really visible and they look white. If the water stays warm for too long, for extended periods of time, more than a month or 2 months, the corals can actually starve to death and die. If the warm waters go away, the corals can recover their algae and actually can continue to recover and continue to grow. So on the Great Barrier Reef, it looked like it was going to hit the whole Great Barrier Reef, but there was a cyclone in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef that actually moved that warm water out of the way. And none of the corals, almost none of the corals died in the southern Great Barrier Reef. The northern Great Barrier Reef, the most hard-hit reefs had about, some of them had up to 70% mortality, from 40 to 70% mortality. But I wouldn't say that the Great Barrier Reef is dead. And there's a list served for coral scientists to talk about the most important things going on in coral reef science. It's called the Coral List. It's run by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And on this list, there were a lot of the scientists involved in that original study, and they felt like they were misquoted in that obituary. So it was basically a journalist that maybe took their words a little too far, because what they did in that survey is during the bleaching event, they did aerial surveys from airplanes so that they could survey, I think they surveyed something like 1,500 reefs across the entire Great Barrier Reef, and then also did diving surveys on most of these reefs to verify the numbers they got from the airplanes. And they presented the number of reefs that were affected by the bleaching and compared it to the 2 previous large bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef where they also did these aerial and in-water surveys. And they showed it was likely the most severe bleaching event ever, but they never felt that the Great Barrier Reef was dead. And in a lot of ways, it goes against what coral reef scientists are working for, which are ways to protect the Great Barrier Reef and reefs globally. And even though a lot of the corals died, and that's a very important thing for the public to know, we don't want the public to give up on coral reefs. And that's why a lot of the coral reef scientists were really upset. Terry Hughes from the James Cook University was the lead author of the Nature paper. And on the Coral List, he directly showed the quote that he gave and how it was turned into the obituary. And he was quite upset about how his words were misconstrued.
I understand.
Or exaggerated.
But doesn't this work, Luc, to really wake up the public in a way?
Yeah, and I think what David just said is very important. First, it's the truth. So thank you for the details, which were not actually available somehow certainly in journal publications and newspapers. So that's news to me. Thank you for sharing that. And also it gives hope to the general public. It makes people think, after all, I can help, I can do something, because if everything's dead, obviously we cannot do anything. We're not going to do the extinction of a coral. So that's very important to share this good news. I mean, I'm kind of a person, if the if the glass is half empty, I'm going to think it's 2/3 full. Just because I'm optimistic and I want to try to help, and that's what we are going to do in our next project together. David, whom I had the great luck to meet about a year ago when I visited Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, and we hit it off on this Cuban project that we can say.
Let's hear more about this. Cuba, the untouched coral reefs of Cuba, really.
Cuba is a really interesting story in the Caribbean. 40 years ago, in the Caribbean, it would not be uncommon to do a dive on a coral reef and see, all the amazing colors of the corals, but also see large fish and large sharks. Now, even on most of the best protected reefs in the Caribbean, the coral cover has declined, 60 to 70% because of disease, because of bleaching events, because of overfishing, because of development. But also there's been massive overfishing that has been occurring for the last several hundred years in the Caribbean. So most of the big fish and sharks are gone. Castro, because he was afraid that his fishermen would leave and go to Miami, limited the amount of gas that his fishermen could have. And that meant that the offshore reefs were never fished. So these are some of the only reefs left that have basically never been fished. So they have intact ecosystems with large sharks, huge groupers, just an amazing ecosystem the way it should be, but that has pretty much been lost through most of the Caribbean. So it's really like a time machine so that we can go back into the past and see what a healthy Caribbean reef looked like. So,
and I think we should do, you'll do that better than me, but I read that coral reefs are 0.2% of the oceans, but 25% of the marine life. So it's like pretty much a forest, and the fauna around, you cannot have one without the other. So that's why it's so important to...
Right. Yeah, people like to call coral reefs the rainforest of the oceans, and that's because they really are the hot spot of diversity of animal and plant life in the oceans. And part of the reason they have this incredible diversity and the incredible colors and there's such an amazing environment is because the corals are like trees in a forest. They provide the three-dimensional structure that provides hiding places and habitat for all these other invertebrates and fish that live on the reef. So when you have a healthy reef, you have a large, really complex structure with lots of hiding places and homes for all these different organisms. When the corals die, often the reef structure starts to collapse, and you lose a lot of that complexity, and you lose a lot of the diversity associated with the reef. You also lose a lot of the economically important fishery species that millions of people globally are dependent on for their livelihoods.
So getting back to Castro, he actually, through a political maneuver, actually saved the reef.
Through a political maneuver, and without realizing it, he became probably the greatest Caribbean conservationist ever.
Yes. And also there was, if I understand, when Russia did cut funding to Cuba in the early 90s, certainly that didn't help the local agriculture, so no pesticides in the agriculture, no runoffs in rivers, so no bad chemicals getting into the reefs as well and the open sea. So that helped as well.
That's a very important point.
Geopolitical decision made 20,000 miles away has an impact on a little island.
So you guys running out there right now, you want to take advantage of this while it's still beautiful and pristine before it's ruined.
We want to create a baseline so that the Cuban people and their government know the state of the reef now and can use that to try to make sure it stays at least as healthier, if not becoming more healthy in the future. Without knowing what you have, you don't know what you've lost. So we really we're going to be using some new imaging technologies to try to really capture the reef in 3 dimensions, showing the complexity of the reefs at different sites, so that if we return or other scientists return in the future, they can see how it's changed and hopefully limit the amount that it gets degraded into the future.
And that's one aspect of this project and expedition which attracted me as not a scientist but an engineer and someone curious about science. In all the projects I do, I like to have science at the heart of the project and expedition. And here, when you mention the science, the equipment, it's really state-of-the-art technology for filming, for taking photos, and then to analyze. You were mentioning, face recognition software to recognize the different types of calls and things like that. So that's very exciting when science and environment protection can
come together. Now, are you doing this through the auspices of the U.S. government? Are they behind you, or is this a totally independent project?
Yeah, it's an independent project that I'm kind of leading in terms of organizing the expedition and the documentary, which will be a part of the project and possibly a book as well. I mean, for sure there is some help of different organizations, but it's not a government project. It's one independent initiative that we are doing here in partnership with Davy at Reefs.
This is fantastic. And when does this begin?
This will begin July of this summer. So we're doing our final planning now.
14th of July. We thought that was a good...
Why not?
It's pretty important in France.
It relates to you and the Bastille. So are we going to be on land as well as in the water?
Yes. Well, the plan is for the expedition to start, on the water in the Jardines de la Reina. For about 10 days, 2 weeks, and doing observation and the filming and the photographing, obviously underwater. And then I thought, so all this film data will be obviously interesting for the science and then to be shared. But I thought, and that's what I like in this project, is to share this information and knowledge beyond just the scientist community. And in order to do that, I'm actually producing a documentary, even docufiction, which will go beyond this and will cover some other, especially environmental elements of where Cuba is today. So that means going obviously on land as well, looking at farms. By definition, most of them are organic. How farming is done. Looking at maybe the best honey being made on the island, and some other aspects of music and art and that kind of a new scene appearing in Cuba for the past few years. So we'll look at that as well. And the idea is to have an end product, which will likely be an hour and a half, regular docu-fiction film, which will be attractive to the general public. So instead of being just inundated with scientific data, they will see that as part of a larger story, and hopefully they will relate to that and act upon it.
So once again, you're raising the awareness of the public with another one of your typical expeditions. I mean, in a way, Luc Hardy, you really are the Jacques Cousteau of Greenwich, Connecticut, aren't you?
maybe of Greenwich. Yeah.
And the other bonus is that it will be a little bit warmer in the Cuban waters than it is in Antarctica.
Yeah, although this year, especially the Arctic has been about 30 Fahrenheit above average. It's been crazy. That's another story.
Oh my gosh, it's very depressing, isn't it? Really,
Yeah. Can I talk on that kind of depressing issue? I think what drew me into this project is people don't respond that well to doom and gloom, and so something like this obituary, the Great Barrier Reef, people think if the story's over, the Great Barrier Reef is dead. They don't want to do anything about it. And I think one of the only ways we're going to save coral reefs is if we actually get people activated so they want to get out and try to protect coral reefs for the future. And the only way they're going to do that is if they can see and appreciate their natural beauty and their complexity and all the amazing things that coral reefs provide people and the oceans. That will get them inspired. And then also, I think, having optimism and introducing optimism so that people feel like it's not hopeless and that there are tangible steps that they can take that can make the world a better place and that can protect coral reefs. So
absolutely.
This is hopefully the first of several films that we'll work on together with this whole theme of trying to protect coral reefs for the future.
That's fantastic. Yeah. When you spoke before about when the coral dies or when it's bleached, how long does it take to turn around?
So when the corals lose their algae and are bleached, they can survive by actually eating algae out of the water, eating plankton, for 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. So they can supplement the energy that they normally get from the photosynthesis of the algae by feeding. They look basically like an upside down sea anemone, and then so there's a ring of tentacles around the mouth, and those tentacles have these stinging cells that are designed for capturing algae that are living in the water. So they have these incredible nematocysts, which are like harpoons that are coiled up, and it's one of the fastest nerve reactions in nature, and they can shoot them out, catch algae that are swimming around, and eat them. They can do that for about 2 or 3 weeks. If the water stays too warm for more than 3 weeks or a month, then the corals start to die. Mm-hmm. And when they die, they're quickly overgrown by seaweeds, and then it can take, depending on the type of coral growth form, it can take between 10 and 100 years for that coral to grow back.
10 to 100 years.
Branching corals grow at about 10 centimeters a year. Massive, like brain corals, grow at about 1 centimeter a year.
Oh,
so there are corals on the Great Barrier Reef that were here when Christopher Columbus came to America. There's corals out there that are over 1,000 years old.
That is so profound.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that in the 1800s, some dead coral in Australia was actually pulled out of the water and used to make cement.
Yeah, and that still happens in a lot of third world countries. They'll even take living corals and grind them up to make building materials.
No.
And that's one of the threats. Yeah, no, it's
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about this project with both of you. Now, I know both of you have traveled extensively and done so many projects like this. David Kline, what would you say is the most profound experience you've had along the way?
I would say the most profound experience that I've had. So I grew up in Southern California, outside of Los Angeles. I was going to the ocean, swimming and surfing since I was about probably 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. So I always loved the ocean. I ended up going off to school to Carleton College in landlocked Minnesota. And when I was there, I realized how much I missed the ocean and what an important part of my life it was. And I got to go to an off-campus program in Australia and New Zealand. And I remember the first time I ever went diving on the Great Barrier Reef as an undergraduate back in 1996. Mm-hmm. And when I dropped into the water and saw the beauty of the Great Barrier Reef, I instantly knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. So I'd say that trip, when I got to dive and discovered the beauty of coral reefs, it really changed my life. And now I've been working on them for over 20 years, and it's what I want to work on until the day I die.
And you're living your passion. Yeah, that's fantastic. And Luc, in all your travels, what would you say?
Well, I'd like to think that the most profound one will be the next one. One of the next ones, and that's what keeps me, going, traveling, and exploring.
He's a gambler.
But more seriously, if I'm looking at the past, it is, for me, there is so far nothing like the I don't want to say emptiness, but the otherworldliness of Antarctica. And I was there the first time in 2003, up a little mountain, just a couple thousand meters, and 360-degree view, literally the end of the world, middle of nowhere. And it was, more like a poetic experience. There was no particular meaning. It was just extraordinary, and I thought, I'm really blessed to enjoy this part of the world.
This is wonderful. Yeah. You're both doing so much. Are you both the kind of personalities to storm governments to get help? In a way, I'm not. My style is more, going boots on the ground, seeing what's happening, and with scientists, like I've done in Greenland with a bird scientist, in Canada with ice scientist and glaciologist. Although I'm part of a environmental organization, Green Cross, which, by the way, is headed by Jean-Michel Cousteau, the son of Captain Cousteau in France. I see my role more as, going, observing, sharing, doing documentaries, books. I've done 5 books, as you know. And I was a member of Greenpeace many years ago, but now I would leave the, activism and the Greenpeacing or the sea shepherding of the likes of Paul Watson to others, and I do what I like best and what I think people see me as being best as as doing. That's wonderful. So, gentlemen, just give us a little something to take away of the Gardens of the Queen that you will be seeing in Cuba. Is there some little visual? You know, we're on radio, but tell us about the colors and the variety of what you'll be beholding.
You've been in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I haven't been to Jardines yet, but I have dove in Cuba on Cuban reefs. So I guess what we're expecting to dive into, stepping off the boat and having large schools of sharks circling around us, which is the way sharks are an incredibly important part of coral reef ecosystems. They're like the lions on the savannah, on the African savannah. So big schools of sharks swimming around, massive groupers. Groupers can be, twice the size of a human with the eyes bigger than an orange, just amazing. Massive fish.
A little intimidating,
but also really incredible to dive next to. And then also coral reefs where there's a real incredible diversity of structures. There's the endangered acropora or staghorn and elkhorn corals that are lost through a lot of the Caribbean. There's large intact forests of them in many parts of Cuba.
Fantastic.
So we'll be diving in an underwater forest with a healthy ecosystem that includes the big sharks and big fish that are really important for keeping the ecosystem in balance.
And also turtles. This place is famous for great turtles and a famous Cuban alligator, which should be interesting to swim with in these waters and should make for good images, hopefully.
This is going to be so exciting. I'm passionate about Shark Week. I never miss Shark Week. Ever. Yeah. So, I might be a little worried if I came with you jumping into the water with all these sharks, but aren't there rather extraordinary, the silky shark, I think it's called, and these things we don't see normally on Shark Week.
I love diving with sharks. Sharks are beautiful and incredibly graceful in the water, and I've had a couple. I mean, you have to give them respect. I've had a couple experiences where I was a little scared, but most of the time I'm in awe of them, and I love seeing them and watching them. They're one of the most beautiful animals you're going to see underwater, and to see a healthy ecosystems where there can be hundreds to thousands of them is really profound.
This is going to be so exciting. Listen, I want to thank David Kline and Luc Hardy, our filmmaker and leader of many, many expeditions. Thank you for being on our show. Is there anything else you want to say before you go off to Cuba?
No, I mean, if there are some auditors who are interested in what we're doing, sure, they should contact the radio station and, get in touch with us.
Is there a website that they can visit right now?
Yeah, the Pax Arctica, paxarctica.org.
Okay.
And contact us and, whatever kind of health partnership, we're happy to discuss.
We will do, and all the best to you. Thank you for being on Center Stage, and everyone, the curtain is now down.